Sarah Mitchell woke to the sound of screaming at 2:47 a.m. Not the scream of someone startled or in sudden pain, but the prolonged, agonized shriek of someone experiencing true terror. It came from the house next door, the Hendersons' place, and it went on for nearly a minute before cutting off abruptly, leaving only the sound of Sarah's own racing heartbeat in the silence that followed. She sat up in bed, her entire body tense, listening. The neighborhood was quiet again, too quiet, as if the scream had sucked all other sound out of the world. Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she reported what she'd heard. The dispatcher promised to send officers immediately. Through her bedroom window, Sarah could see the Henderson house, a modest two-story colonial identical to her own. Every light was off, no movement, no signs of disturbance, just darkness and silence. The police arrived within 10 minutes, their red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in alternating colors. Sarah watched from her window as two officers approached the Henderson house. They knocked. No answer. They knocked harder, announcing themselves. Still nothing. After several attempts, they returned to their patrol car and spoke into their radios. 20 minutes later, more officers arrived. Sarah threw on a robe and went outside. "Did you find anything?" she asked Officer Martinez, whom she recognized from neighborhood watch meetings. He shook his head, looking puzzled. "House is locked up tight. No signs of forced entry. No lights on inside. We knocked for 15 minutes. If anyone's in there, they're either dead asleep or not home." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm September night. "But I heard screaming. Someone was in agony. It was clear as day." "We believe you heard something, Ms. Mitchell," Officer Martinez said carefully. "But we can't enter without cause. No signs of a break-in, no response from inside, no evidence of a crime. The Hendersons might not even be home. We'll file a report and check back tomorrow." Sarah watched the police cars drive away, leaving her alone on the dark street. She looked at the Henderson house one more time before going back inside. Every window remained dark, but Sarah could have sworn she saw a curtain move on the second floor just slightly, as if someone had been watching the police the entire time. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because the ending of this story will shake you in ways you never imagined. And tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this story? Sarah couldn't sleep after the police left. She lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, listening for any sound from next door. The Henderson house shared a wall with hers, a duplex design that meant their homes were essentially mirror images, separated by a layer of brick and insulation. She'd never heard much through that wall in the 6 months since she'd moved in. The Hendersons were quiet neighbors, almost too quiet. She realized she'd never actually met them. She'd seen them a handful of times. A man in his 40s with dark hair and glasses, a woman of similar age with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, and their teenage daughter. They'd wave politely when getting their mail or taking out trash, but they'd never introduced themselves, never attended block parties or neighborhood gatherings. Sarah had chalked it up to them being private people, nothing more. But now, lying in the dark, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her neighbors. Who were the Hendersons, really? And what had caused that terrible scream? Around 5 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, Sarah got up and made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table, which faced the window overlooking the narrow strip of grass between her house and the Hendersons. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Everything looked normal. Peaceful, like the scream from hours ago had been a bad dream. But Sarah knew it hadn't been a dream. She'd heard it clearly. Someone in that house had been screaming in terror or pain, and now the police had found nothing. No one had answered the door. No lights had come on. It was as if the house itself had swallowed the scream and the person who'd made it. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Amy, who lived across town. "You up? Can't sleep? Coffee?" Sarah texted back immediately. "Come over, need to talk." Amy arrived 30 minutes later, looking concerned when she saw Sarah's face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I heard screaming," Sarah said. "From next door, middle of the night. I called the police, but they found nothing. No one answered the door. It's like nothing happened." Amy sat down at the kitchen table, accepting the coffee Sarah poured for her. "Tell me everything." Sarah did, describing the sound. The pure terror in that scream, how it had gone on and on before cutting off abruptly. Amy listened carefully, her expression growing more troubled as Sarah talked. "What do you know about your neighbors?" Amy asked when Sarah finished. "Almost nothing. The Hendersons, a couple and their daughter. They keep to themselves. I've never even heard their first names." "Don't you think that's weird? 6 months and you've never had a real conversation with them?" "Some people are just private," Sarah said defensively, though even as she spoke she realized Amy had a point. In Sarah's previous neighborhood, she'd known all her neighbors within weeks, had attended their barbecues, knew their children's names, borrowed tools and returned favors. But here, the Hendersons were complete strangers, despite sharing a wall. "Sarah, I think you should be careful," Amy said. "Maybe even consider moving." "Move? I just got here. I can't afford to break my lease over one scary noise." "One scary noise that the police couldn't explain," Amy pointed out. "One scary noise that came from a house where no one answered, even though someone had to be home to make that scream. That's not normal. That's not safe." They spent the next hour talking, with Amy trying to convince Sarah to at least stay at her place for a few nights. But Sarah refused. She'd run from her problems before, left her ex-husband, left her old job, started over in this new city. She wasn't going to run again. She was going to figure out what was happening next door, even if it meant confronting the Hendersons directly. After Amy left, Sarah decided to do some research. She pulled up property records online and found the house next door listed under Henderson, Robert and Patricia. Robert and Patricia Henderson. At least now she had names. She searched social media but found nothing. No Facebook profiles, no Instagram accounts, no digital footprint at all. That was unusual in this day and age, but not impossible. Maybe they were just very private people. She tried a different approach, searching news archives for the address. What she found made her blood run cold. 5 years ago, there had been a police call to that address, a domestic disturbance. The article was vague on details, but it mentioned that officers had responded to reports of screaming and had made an arrest. Robert Henderson had been charged with assault, but the charges were later dropped. Sarah sat back, her heart pounding. A history of violence, screaming that had brought police before, and now screaming again, but this time with no one answering the door. What if Patricia Henderson was in danger? What if that scream had been her and Robert had prevented her from answering the door? Sarah looked at the clock. It was 9 a.m. She made a decision. She was going to knock on the Hendersons' door herself. She was going to find out what was happening in that house. She walked next door and rang the doorbell. No answer. She rang again, then knocked loudly. "Hello? Mr. and Mrs. Henderson? It's Sarah from next door. I wanted to check if everything's okay." Nothing, but Sarah could feel something. A presence. Someone was home. She was sure of it. "I heard something last night," Sarah called through the door. "I'm worried about you. If you need help, please let me know." Still nothing. Sarah stood there for a full 5 minutes, knocking periodically, calling out. But the house remained silent. Finally, frustrated and more than a little scared, Sarah went back to her own home. She'd barely sat down when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Stop knocking on our door." A woman's voice, quiet and tense. "We're fine. Leave us alone." "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah asked, "I'm sorry, I was just worried after last night." "Nothing happened last night. You didn't hear anything. Don't call the police again. Don't come to our door. Just leave us alone." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone. The woman had sounded terrified. Not angry, terrified. Like she was reading from a script. Like someone was standing over her, forcing her to make that call. Sarah's hands shook as she replayed the conversation in her head. Nothing happened last night. But something had happened. Sarah had heard it. The police had heard her report. This wasn't her imagination. She needed to know what was happening in that house. And she needed to know tonight, because she had a terrible feeling that whatever had caused that scream was going to happen again. Sarah spent the day unable to focus on anything else. She called in sick to her job at the marketing firm, something she rarely did, but there was no way she could concentrate on work. Instead, she sat at her kitchen window, watching the Henderson house, looking for any sign of life, any indication of what might be happening inside. Around noon, the garage door opened. Sarah sat up straight, watching intently. A silver SUV backed out, Robert Henderson at the wheel. Sarah couldn't see anyone else in the vehicle. The garage door closed, and Robert drove away. Sarah immediately grabbed her phone and pulled up the security camera app she'd recently installed. She had a camera pointed at her driveway, but it also captured part of the Hendersons' property. She rewound to earlier in the morning. There, at 8:15 a.m., the footage showed the teenage daughter leaving for school. She walked to the corner where a bus presumably picked her up. Sarah fast-forwarded through the footage. The daughter hadn't returned yet, which made sense if school was still in session. Robert had just left, so if Patricia Henderson was home alone, Sarah made a decision. She grabbed her phone and headed next door again. This time she didn't knock. Instead, she walked around the side of the house, peering through windows. The curtains were drawn on most of them, but she found one in the kitchen where she could see through a gap. The kitchen looked normal. Clean counters, dishes in the rack, a calendar on the wall. Nothing disturbed. Nothing suspicious. Sarah moved to the back of the house. The backyard was small but well maintained. A sliding glass door led to what looked like a living room. Sarah cupped her hands against the glass, trying to see inside, and then she saw her. Patricia Henderson sat in a chair in the living room, facing away from Sarah. She was completely still, unnaturally still. Sarah knocked on the glass. "Mrs. Henderson, are you okay?" Patricia didn't move, didn't turn around, just sat there, motionless. Sarah knocked harder, calling louder. Still nothing. She tried the sliding door, locked. She banged on the glass with both fists. "Mrs. Henderson? Patricia, can you hear me?" Finally, slowly, Patricia's head turned. Sarah saw her face and had to suppress a gasp. Patricia's eyes were red and swollen, as if she'd been crying for hours. Her skin was pale, her expression blank. She looked at Sarah with no recognition, no emotion, just stared. "Are you hurt?" Sarah called through the glass. "Do you need help? Should I call someone?" Patricia's lips moved. Sarah couldn't hear through the glass, but she could read the words. "Go away. I want to help. Go away." This time, Patricia's voice was loud enough to carry through the glass. Harsh, desperate. Then she stood up quickly and walked out of Sarah's sight, disappearing deeper into the house. Sarah stood in the Hendersons' backyard, shaking. Something was very wrong. Patricia looked traumatized, looked like she'd been through something terrible. But what? And why wouldn't she accept help? Sarah returned to her house and immediately called Officer Martinez. "I need to report what I saw," she told him. She described Patricia's appearance, her behavior, the way she'd looked injured or traumatized. "Ms. Mitchell," Officer Martinez said carefully, "we responded to your call last night. We found no evidence of a crime. Mrs. Henderson called you this morning and asked you to leave them alone. Now you're telling me you were looking through their windows. I'm worried about her. I understand that. But legally we can't do anything unless we have evidence of a crime or Mrs. Henderson asks for help. You looking through their windows, that's actually trespassing. I'm telling you this as a friend. Back off. If something is happening there, Mrs. Henderson needs to be the one to report it." Sarah hung up, frustrated. She understood Officer Martinez's position, but it didn't change what she'd seen. Patricia Henderson was in distress. Something terrible was happening in that house, and tonight, Sarah was sure, the screaming would happen again. She was right. At 2:47 a.m., the exact same time as the previous night, Sarah jolted awake to the sound of screaming. The same prolonged, agonized shriek, the same terror, and this time, Sarah was ready. She'd set up her phone to record audio, pointing it at the shared wall. She'd set up a camera aimed at the Henderson house. She was going to capture proof. The screaming went on for 53 seconds. Sarah counted. Then it cut off abruptly, just like before. Sarah checked her phone. The audio had recorded. She had proof. She immediately called 911 again, reporting the screaming, telling them she had audio evidence. The same officers arrived, Officer Martinez and his partner, Officer Chen. They looked tired and frustrated. Miss Mitchell. I have it recorded, Sarah interrupted, showing them her phone. Listen. She played the audio. The screaming was clear, unmistakable. Both officers' expressions changed as they listened. That's definitely someone in distress, Officer Chen said. That's enough for a wellness check. They approached the Henderson house, knocked. No answer. They knocked harder, calling out. Nothing. They tried the doorbell multiple times. The house remained dark and silent. We're going to wake the neighbors if we keep this up, Officer Martinez said. But I'm calling for a supervisor. This is enough to justify entry if we can establish someone's in danger. A sergeant arrived 20 minutes later. He listened to Sarah's recording, looked at the dark house and made the call. We're going in. Chen, see if you can get that front door open. It took Officer Chen less than a minute to pick the lock. The three officers entered the house, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Sarah watched from her yard, her heart pounding. They were inside for 15 minutes. When they emerged, all three looked confused. There's no one home, the sergeant told Sarah. House is empty, no signs of disturbance. No signs anyone's been there recently. That's impossible, Sarah said. The screaming came from there. I have it on recording. I believe you recorded something, the sergeant said. But there's no one in that house. Beds haven't been slept in, no dishes in the sink, no food in the fridge. It looks like no one's lived there for weeks. But I saw Patricia Henderson today. She was in the living room. There's no one there now, the sergeant said firmly. Ms. Mitchell, I don't know what's going on, but I need you to stop calling us about this house. Whatever you're hearing, it's not coming from the Henderson residence. Maybe it's a TV, maybe it's carrying from another house, maybe it's something else, but there's nothing happening here. The officers left. Sarah stood alone in her yard, staring at the dark house. She'd seen Patricia. She'd heard the screaming, but the police were telling her the house was empty. What the hell was happening? Sarah didn't sleep for the rest of that night. She sat at her kitchen window, watching the Henderson house, waiting for any sign of life. At 6:30 a.m., she saw something that made her question everything the police had said. The garage door opened, and the teenage daughter emerged, backpack on, walking to the corner to catch her school bus. Sarah ran outside. "Excuse me," she called. The girl turned, looking surprised. Sarah jogged over to her. "Hi, I'm Sarah from next door. I've been worried about your mum. Is everything okay?" The girl's expression closed off immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your mum, Patricia. Is she home? Is she all right?" "My mum is fine. Leave us alone." The girl turned away just as a school bus appeared around the corner. "Wait," Sarah said desperately. "Please, I'm just trying to help." But the girl was already boarding the bus. Sarah watched it drive away, feeling more confused than ever. The daughter clearly lived in that house. She'd come from there, walked from the garage to the street. But the police had said the house was empty. Sarah went home and pulled up the security footage from her camera. She rewound to the early morning hours, when the police had been inside the Henderson house. She could see the officers entering through the front door, their flashlights visible through windows. She watched the timestamp tick by, 15 minutes of them searching inside. Then they emerged, telling Sarah the house was empty. But Sarah noticed something odd. Just as the police were leaving, she saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. A shadow, brief but distinct. Someone had been watching from up there. Someone had been in the house while the police searched. Sarah grabbed her laptop and started researching seriously. She needed to know everything about the Henderson family and this property. Property records showed Robert and Patricia Henderson had bought the house 7 years ago. Previous to that, it had been owned by a family named the Thompsons, who'd lived there for 15 years without incident. She dug deeper, searching for any news articles or reports. What she found made her stomach turn. 12 years ago, before the Thompsons, the house had been the site of something terrible, a murder-suicide. A man named David Walsh had killed his wife Emma and then himself. The incident had been brutal enough to make the news. Sarah read the articles with growing horror. Emma Walsh's body had been found in the upstairs bedroom. She'd been screaming for help, neighbors reported, but by the time police arrived, both Emma and David were dead. The investigation revealed a long history of abuse. Emma had been trapped in that house, had been hurt repeatedly, and had finally died there. Sarah sat back, her mind racing. A woman had died in that house, screaming for help. And now, 12 years later, Sarah was hearing screaming from that same house. Every night at the same time. Screaming that no one else seemed to hear, coming from a house the police claimed was empty. Was it possible the house was haunted? Was Sarah hearing echoes of Emma Walsh's final moments? That seemed impossible, crazy. But what other explanation was there? Sarah decided she needed to talk to someone who might have answers. She searched online for paranormal investigators in the area and found a woman named Dr. Eleanor Price, a parapsychologist who studied reported hauntings. Sarah sent her an email explaining the situation and was surprised to receive a response within an hour. "Your case interests me greatly. I'd like to visit the property this evening if possible." They arranged to meet at 6 p.m. Dr. Price arrived in a sedan loaded with equipment, EMF readers, thermal cameras, audio recorders. She was in her 50s, with grey-streaked hair and an air of professional competence that Sarah found reassuring. "Tell me everything," Dr. Price said, as they sat in Sarah's living room. Sarah did, describing the screaming, the police finding nothing, seeing Patricia Henderson, the house allegedly being empty, the history of violence on the property. Dr. Price listened carefully, taking notes. When Sarah finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "I've investigated similar cases. Residual hauntings, we call them. Traumatic events can leave an imprint on a location. The energy of that trauma can replay like a recording at specific times, usually the anniversary of the event." "But this is happening every night," Sarah pointed out. "True, that's unusual. Most residual hauntings occur on anniversaries, but in cases of extreme trauma, repeated abuse over time, the imprinting can be stronger, more frequent." Dr. Price looked at the Henderson house through Sarah's window. "The fact that you're seeing people there complicates things. Residual hauntings don't typically involve interactive figures. Those suggest intelligent hauntings, spirits that can perceive and respond to the living." "So you think the house is actually haunted by Emma Walsh?" "I think something is happening in that house that defies normal explanation. Whether it's a haunting, a residual imprint, or something else entirely, I won't know until I investigate." Dr. Price stood. "Let's set up equipment and see what we capture tonight." They spent the next 2 hours setting up. Dr. Price placed cameras and audio recorders aimed at the Henderson house. She set up an EMF reader that would alert them to electromagnetic fluctuations. She arranged thermal cameras to detect temperature changes. By the time they finished, Sarah's house looked like a paranormal investigation command center. "Now we wait," Dr. Price said. "If the pattern holds, we should hear the screaming at 2:47 a.m. My equipment will record everything." They waited. Sarah made coffee. They talked about Dr. Price's other investigations, the various hauntings she'd studied over her 30-year career. "I've seen things that can't be explained by conventional science," Dr. Price said. "Doors opening on their own, objects moving, voices captured on recordings. But I've also seen many cases that had logical explanations. Old houses settling, wind animals, overactive imaginations. The key is approaching each case with both an open mind and healthy skepticism." "What do you think is happening here?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, I don't know yet. The facts don't quite fit any pattern I'm familiar with. The police seeing nothing while you hear screaming, seeing people in the house when the police say it's empty. That suggests either a very powerful haunting that can manipulate perception, or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" "Or something else. Something I haven't encountered before." At 2:45 a.m., Dr. Price's equipment suddenly came alive. EMF readers began beeping. Thermal cameras showed temperature drops in specific areas. And then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the screaming began. Sarah and Dr. Price both heard it clearly. But this time, with all the equipment running, Sarah also saw something on the thermal camera. A figure in the upstairs window of the Henderson house, a heat signature in the shape of a person, moving frantically, as if trying to escape. The screaming went on for nearly a minute, then cut off abruptly. The heat signature disappeared. The EMF readings returned to normal. The temperature stabilized. It was as if whatever had appeared had been sucked back into nothing. Dr. Price was already reviewing the recordings. her hands moving quickly over her laptop keyboard. "I've got it all," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Audio, video, thermal, EMF readings. Sarah, this is remarkable. I've never seen such clear documentation of a paranormal event." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked. "It means you were right. Something is happening in that house. Something that exists outside normal physical laws. Something that's trapped in a cycle of repeating trauma." "Doctor." Price looked up at Sarah, her expression grave. "And I think it's been trying to get your attention, trying to ask for help." Dr. Price spent the next 2 days analyzing the evidence they'd collected. Sarah went to work but found it impossible to concentrate. Her mind kept drifting back to that heat signature in the window, the sound of that terrible screaming, the horrible realization that something trapped and suffering existed in the house next door. On the 3rd day, Dr. Price called. "I need to show you something. Can I come over?" Sarah agreed immediately. When Dr. Price arrived, she had her laptop and a folder full of printouts. They sat at Sarah's kitchen table, and Dr. Price pulled up the audio file from the screaming. "I've enhanced this recording using specialized software," Dr. Price explained, "and I found something in the background. Listen carefully." She played the audio, the screaming clear and terrible. But then Dr. Price adjusted the levels, filtering out certain frequencies. Behind the screaming, Sarah could hear something else. A voice, a woman's voice, but different from the screaming. This voice was speaking words, though they were difficult to make out. "Help me," the voice said. "Please help me. He won't let me leave. I can't get out. Someone please hear me. Please help me." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's Emma Walsh. That has to be her, trapped there, still calling for help 12 years later." "I thought so too at first," Dr. Price said. "But then I compared the voice to recordings of Emma Walsh from before her death. There were videos of her online, interviews from a community event she'd participated in. This isn't Emma's voice, Sarah. It's close, but it's not the same person." "Then who?" "I think it's Patricia Henderson." Dr. Price pulled out another set of printouts. "I did some research into the Henderson family. Patricia Henderson isn't what she appears to be. Or rather, she is exactly what she appears to be, a woman trapped in an abusive relationship." Dr. Price spread out the documents. "Patricia Henderson has called police 12 times over the past 7 years. Domestic disturbances, reports of screaming. But every time police arrive, she recants, says it was just an argument, refuses to press charges. Classic pattern of domestic abuse." "But the police said the house was empty when they searched it," Sarah said. "Which means Robert Henderson has found a way to hide her, or to make the abuse invisible somehow. The paranormal elements, the screaming at the exact same time every night, the heat signature, the way the house appears empty, all of that is real, but it might not be a haunting. It might be something else." "What do you mean?" Dr. Price leaned forward. "What if the house isn't haunted by Emma Walsh? What if it's amplifying what's happening to Patricia? Emma died there after years of abuse. That kind of trauma can saturate a location. And when Patricia moved in, when she began experiencing similar abuse, maybe the house started responding, reflecting her suffering, broadcasting it. The screaming you're hearing isn't a ghost, Sarah. It's Patricia, but somehow amplified by the residual energy in that house." Sarah tried to process this. "So the house is acting like an antenna, transmitting Patricia's abuse." "Something like that. I've seen cases where locations with traumatic histories can affect new residents. Usually it's subtle, depression, anxiety, nightmares. But in rare cases, when new trauma echoes old trauma, the house can create phenomena that blur the line between the living and the dead. Then Patricia is in danger right now. We need to get her out of there." "I agree, but we need to be smart about this. Robert Henderson is clearly controlling her, keeping her isolated. If we just call the police again, he'll hide her or she'll recant like she has before. We need proof, undeniable evidence that can't be dismissed." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Dr. Price would set up more equipment, better cameras, devices that could record through walls. They would capture evidence of Robert abusing Patricia. They would document everything. And then they would present it to the police in a way that couldn't be ignored. "There's something else I need to tell you," Dr. Price said as she was leaving. "I've researched Robert Henderson's background. He has a history. 2 previous wives, both divorced him citing abuse. One filed for a restraining order. He's been arrested twice but never convicted. He's good at manipulating situations, at presenting himself as normal while hiding what he really is." "How is he getting away with this?" Sarah asked, frustrated. "Because abusers are often charming, successful, normal-seeming to the outside world. Robert works in finance, earns good money, active in community organizations. On the surface, he's the perfect neighbor. But behind closed doors..." Dr. Price shook her head. "Men like Robert are experts at creating private hells, and the supernatural elements here make it even harder for Patricia. Who would believe her if she said her husband's abuse is being amplified by a haunted house?" After Dr. Price left, Sarah found herself staring at the Henderson house with new understanding. Patricia was in there, trapped, being hurt, and somehow the house itself had become complicit in broadcasting her suffering, creating phenomena that made it impossible for help to arrive. The screaming at 2:47 a.m. wasn't a ghost. It was Patricia's actual cries for help, somehow being echoed and amplified by the traumatic history of the house itself. That night, Sarah didn't wait for 2:47 a.m. At midnight, she saw lights come on in the Henderson house. Through her enhanced cameras, Dr. Price had left her with better equipment. Sarah could see into the lit rooms. She saw Robert Henderson moving through the house with a drink in his hand. She saw him climb the stairs, saw lights come on in the upstairs bedroom. And then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Patricia Henderson being dragged into view. Robert grabbed her by the arm, yanking her roughly. Patricia's mouth opened in what must have been a cry of pain or protest, but Sarah couldn't hear it through the walls. She watched Robert shove Patricia onto the bed, saw him lean over her, shouting. His face was twisted with rage. Patricia cowered, trying to protect herself with her arms. Sarah grabbed her phone, calling 911 again. "There's a domestic assault happening right now. 1847 Maple Street. I can see it through my window. The husband is attacking his wife." The dispatcher promised to send officers immediately. Sarah kept watching through the camera, documenting everything. Robert stood over Patricia for another minute, still shouting. Then he seemed to collect himself, straighten his clothes, and walk out of the room. The lights went off. Everything went dark. By the time police arrived 10 minutes later, the house was silent again, dark. When they knocked, Robert Henderson answered, looking calm and professional. Sarah watched from her window as he spoke to the officers, gesturing casually, even smiling. The officers looked back at Sarah's house, spoke to Robert some more, then left. Sarah's phone rang. "Officer Martinez." "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Henderson says you've been harassing his family. He says you've been making false reports, trespassing on his property, looking through his windows. He's considering filing a restraining order against you. But I saw him attacking his wife. I have video. Mr. Henderson showed us his wife. She's fine. No injuries, no signs of distress. She told us everything is fine and asked us to tell you to stop harassing them. He's controlling her. He's abusing her and she's too scared to speak up." "Ms. Mitchell," Officer Martinez said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I'm going to be straight with you. You need to stop. Mr. Henderson is being very patient, but if you keep this up, you could face legal consequences. Harassment, stalking, making false reports. These are crimes. I understand you think you're helping, but you're making things worse. Please, just let it go." He hung up. Sarah stared at her phone, feeling helpless rage building inside her. Robert Henderson had won again. He'd convinced the police she was the problem, and meanwhile Patricia was trapped in that house suffering, with no one to help her. At 2:47 a.m., the screaming began again. Sarah recorded it, just as she had every night. But this time she enhanced the audio herself, using the software Dr. Price had shown her. And this time she could hear every word Patricia was saying beneath the screaming. "Help me, please, I'm trapped, he won't let me leave. He hurts me every night, please someone help me. I can't get out, I can't leave, he'll kill me if I try, please, please, please help me." Sarah saved the recording. Tomorrow she would find a way to get Patricia out of that house. She didn't care about restraining orders or legal consequences. A woman was being tortured next door, and Sarah refused to let that continue. One way or another, she was going to save Patricia Henderson. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work again. She couldn't focus on marketing campaigns and client meetings when Patricia Henderson was suffering next door. She needed a plan, and she needed help. Dr. Price arrived at Sarah's house around 10 a.m., bringing more equipment and a grim determination. "I've been thinking about this all night," Dr. Price said. "We need to document everything, not just the supernatural phenomena, but the actual abuse. We need video evidence that's so clear the police can't dismiss it. And we need to figure out how Robert is hiding Patricia when the police search." "I think I know," Sarah said. She'd been reviewing the footage from when police had entered the house. "Look at this." She showed Dr. Price the video, pointing out the shadow in the upstairs window while police were searching. Someone was watching them. That means there's a hidden space, somewhere in that house where Robert can hide Patricia when needed. "A safe room," Dr. Price said, "or a hidden panic room. Houses like these sometimes have them. The question is, how do we prove it exists?" They spent the morning researching. Dr. Price brought up architectural plans for the house, which were on file with the city from when it was built. They studied the layout carefully. The house appeared straightforward, standard rooms, normal proportions. But Dr. Price noticed something odd. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the second floor plans. "The master bedroom here. According to these dimensions, it should be larger. But if you calculate the actual wall positions, there's about 6 feet of space that's unaccounted for. A false wall, probably, creating a hidden room behind it." "That's where he's keeping her," Sarah said. "When police come, he forces her in there. She can't call out, can't be found, and he acts like everything's normal." "We need to get proof of that room's existence," Dr. Price said, "and we need to catch him in the act of abusing her. Both pieces of evidence together will be impossible for police to ignore." They formulated a plan. Dr. Price would use her thermal imaging cameras, the kind that could see through walls, to document the hidden room and Patricia's presence in it. Sarah would provoke another police visit by reporting the nightly screaming, but this time they'd have Dr. Price on hand with equipment that could prove Patricia was there, even when Robert claimed the house was empty. But they needed one more thing. They needed Patricia's daughter on their side. If the girl would testify to what was happening in the house, if she'd corroborate the abuse, it would strengthen their case immeasurably. "I'll talk to her," Sarah said. "When she goes to catch the school bus tomorrow morning, I'll try to reach her. Be careful," Dr. Price warned. "If Robert finds out you've contacted his daughter, he might escalate. Men like him, when they feel cornered, become more dangerous." That evening, Sarah and Dr. Price set up their surveillance. They positioned thermal cameras, audio recorders, and high-resolution video cameras, all aimed at the Henderson house. They set up monitors in Sarah's living room so they could watch everything in real time. Around 10 p.m., the lights came on in the Henderson house. Through the thermal camera, Sarah could see heat signatures moving inside, 3 of them. Robert, Patricia, and their daughter. They appeared to be having dinner together. From the outside, it looked like a normal family evening. But at 11:30 p.m., the daughter's heat signature moved upstairs and disappeared into what must have been her bedroom. Robert and Patricia remained downstairs. Sarah watched as Robert's signature moved closer to Patricia's. They appeared to be talking. Then Robert's movements became aggressive, sudden, sharp motions. Patricia's heat signature backed away, then tried to leave the room. Robert blocked her path. "He's starting," Dr. Price said quietly, adjusting her cameras. "We need to document everything." Through the thermal imaging, Sarah watched what appeared to be Robert grabbing Patricia. Her heat signature struggled, tried to pull away. Robert's signature forced her toward the stairs. They could see the struggle clearly, Patricia resisting, Robert overpowering her, dragging her upward. They disappeared into the upstairs hallway. A few minutes later, lights came on in the master bedroom. Through the cameras, Sarah could see into the room. Robert had Patricia by the arm, his face twisted with rage as he shouted at her. Patricia was crying, trying to speak, but Robert kept cutting her off. He shoved her onto the bed, then grabbed something from the dresser. It looked like a belt. "Call the police," Dr. Price said. "Now, while we have visual." Sarah dialed 911, her hands shaking. Domestic violence in progress, 1847 Maple Street. I can see the husband assaulting his wife with a weapon. Please send help immediately. The dispatcher confirmed officers were on their way. On the monitor, Sarah watched Robert raise the belt. Patricia tried to shield herself. The belt came down. Again. Again. Each strike made Sarah flinch, made her want to run over there and break down the door herself. But Dr. Price held her back. "We need to document it all," Dr. Price said, though her voice was strained with the same horror Sarah felt. "The police need to see this." The assault continued for 3 agonizing minutes. Then Robert seemed to hear something, probably his security system alerting him to police approaching. He dropped the belt, grabbed Patricia roughly by the arm, and dragged her to the far wall of the bedroom. On the thermal camera, Sarah watched him press something on the wall. A section of it swung open, the hidden room. He shoved Patricia inside, and the wall closed behind her. By the time police knocked on the door 30 seconds later, Robert had composed himself. He answered the door calmly, inviting the officers in. Sarah and Dr. Price watched through their monitors as the officers searched the house. They went through every room, including the master bedroom where the assault had just occurred. But they found nothing. No Patricia. No evidence of violence, no belt. Robert must have hidden it in the secret room with Patricia. When the officers left, Sarah's phone rang. Officer Martinez, and he sounded angry. "Ms. Mitchell, this is your final warning. Mr. Henderson is filing a restraining order. You're not to contact his family or come within 500 feet of his property. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. Do you understand? But I have video. I don't care what you think you have. A judge will be reviewing the restraining order tomorrow. Until then, stay away from the Hendersons. I mean it, Sarah." He hung up. Sarah looked at Dr. Price desperately. "He's going to get away with it again. Even with all our evidence, they're protecting him." "Not if we go over their heads," Dr. Price said. She was already on her laptop, typing rapidly. "I have contacts at the State Attorney General's office. I've helped them before with cases involving abuse and stalking. They know my work is credible. I'm sending them everything we've captured. The thermal imaging showing the hidden room, the video of the assault, the audio recordings of Patricia calling for help. This is beyond local police now. This is a case that needs state intervention." While Dr. Price worked on that, Sarah reviewed the footage they'd captured. The thermal imaging clearly showed Patricia being forced into a hidden space. The video clearly showed Robert assaulting her. The audio recordings captured her cries for help. Together it was overwhelming evidence that something terrible was happening in that house. But Sarah's mind kept going back to something Dr. Price had said earlier, that the house itself was amplifying Patricia's suffering, broadcasting it. At 2:47 a.m. the screaming would start again, the same time every night, the same duration, the same supernatural quality that made it echo through the walls despite the police finding nothing. "Dr. Price," Sarah said slowly, "what if we could use the house's phenomena against Robert? What if we could prove that the screaming is Patricia, that it's coming from the hidden room, and that the house is somehow making it audible to me, but not to others?" Dr. Price looked up from her laptop. "You mean demonstrate the phenomenon in real time, with witnesses?" "Exactly. If we could get someone from the Attorney General's office here tonight, if they could hear the screaming and see our thermal imaging at the same time, they'd have to believe us. They'd have to act." Dr. Price made a call. She spoke quickly and urgently to someone on the other end. When she hung up, she nodded. "Assistant Attorney General Rebecca Walsh is coming. She'll be here by 2 a.m. She specializes in domestic violence cases, and she's very interested in our evidence. If she witnesses what happens at 2:47, if she sees what we've documented, she has the authority to order an immediate intervention." They spent the next few hours reviewing all their evidence, preparing their presentation. At 1:45 a.m., a black sedan pulled up in front of Sarah's house. A woman in her 40s, dressed professionally despite the late hour, got out. Dr. Price met her at the door. "Rebecca, thank you for coming," Dr. Price said. "Eleanor, when you said you had evidence of abuse combined with paranormal phenomena, I had to see it for myself. Rebecca Walsh entered, and Sarah saw she carried a briefcase full of official-looking documents. "Show me everything." They did. They showed her the thermal imaging of Patricia being forced into the hidden room, the video of Robert assaulting her, the audio recordings, the architectural evidence of a hidden space, the history of police calls, and Patricia's pattern of recanting. Rebecca listened and watched intently, taking notes, occasionally asking pointed questions. "This is compelling," Rebecca said when they finished. "Very compelling. But you understand that supernatural elements won't hold up in court? I need to focus on the concrete evidence of abuse in the hidden room." "That's why we want you here at 247, Dr. Price explained. "What happens then will prove that Patricia is in that house, in that hidden room, calling for help. It's not supernatural in the sense of ghosts or spirits. It's the house acting as an amplifier for her distress, but you need to experience it to understand." They waited. 2:45 a.m. The Henderson house was dark and silent. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., it started. The screaming. That terrible, prolonged shriek of pure agony and terror. Rebecca Walsh's eyes went wide. "That's coming from next door?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Watch the thermal imaging." On the monitor, they could see a heat signature in the hidden room. Patricia, her body position suggesting she was the source of the screaming. The audio equipment captured it. The video cameras recorded it. For 53 seconds, Patricia Henderson's cries for help filled the night. Then silence. The heat signature in the hidden room stopped moving. Everything went quiet. Rebecca Walsh stood there, visibly shaken. "I heard it," she said quietly. "I heard her." "And your equipment documented her location." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling for an emergency intervention team. We're going in that house tonight, right now, and we're getting Patricia Henderson out." Within 20 minutes, the street was filled with vehicles, state police, social services, EMTs. Rebecca Walsh presented a judge's emergency order, obtained via phone call in the middle of the night, authorizing immediate entry and intervention. Officers approached the Henderson house and pounded on the door. Robert answered, looking confused and angry. "What's going on? It's 3 a.m. "Mr. Henderson, we have a court order to enter and search these premises," Rebecca announced. "We have evidence that your wife is being held against her will in a hidden room. Step aside." Robert's expression changed from confusion to barely controlled rage. "There's no hidden room. My wife isn't here. She's visiting her mother." "Then you won't mind us searching," Rebecca said. Officers moved past Robert into the house. They went directly to the master bedroom, to the wall where thermal imaging had shown the hidden room. They began examining the wall, looking for the mechanism to open it. Robert stood in the doorway, his jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake. There's nothing there." An officer found it, a section of baseboard that pressed inward, triggering the hidden door. The false wall swung open, revealing a small room behind it, and inside, huddled on a narrow bed, bruised and terrified, was Patricia Henderson. "Help me," she whispered. "Please help me." EMTs rushed in immediately, gently helping Patricia out of the hidden room. She was shaking violently, could barely stand. Her arms were covered in bruises, fresh ones and older ones in various stages of healing. Her face was swollen on one side. When she saw Robert, she cringed and tried to hide behind one of the EMTs. "It's okay," the EMT said softly. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Robert was already being handcuffed. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tight. "My wife has mental health issues. That room was for her own safety." "Save it for your lawyer," Rebecca Walsh said coldly. "Robert Henderson, you're under arrest for kidnapping, domestic violence, false imprisonment, and assault. Officers, get him out of here." As Robert was led away, still protesting his innocence, Sarah watched from her yard. She felt an overwhelming sense of relief, mixed with horror at what Patricia must have endured. Dr. Price stood beside her, documenting everything with her cameras. Patricia was brought out on a stretcher, though she was conscious and talking to the EMTs. As they passed Sarah's house, Patricia turned her head and looked directly at Sarah. "You heard me," she said, her voice hoarse from screaming. All those nights you heard me, thank you for not giving up. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry it took so long. I'm so sorry. You saved my life, Patricia whispered, before the EMTs loaded her into the ambulance. Rebecca Walsh approached Sarah and Dr. Price as the ambulance drove away. You two did something remarkable tonight. Without your persistence, without your evidence, Patricia would still be trapped in there. The local police meant well, but they were outmaneuvered by a very clever abuser. Your combination of traditional investigation and unconventional methods broke through where conventional approaches failed. What happens now? Sarah asked. Patricia will be taken to a hospital for treatment. She'll be evaluated, both physically and psychologically. We'll gather her statement, and we'll build a case against Robert Henderson that he won't be able to charm his way out of. Rebecca pulled out a business card and handed it to Sarah. I'll need you both to provide formal statements. Your evidence will be crucial at trial. After Rebecca left and the street finally cleared, Sarah and Dr. Price went back inside. They sat in Sarah's living room, exhausted but relieved. It was nearly 5 a.m. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. The supernatural elements, the screaming that happened at the same time every night, the way the house seemed to amplify Patricia's suffering. What do you think that really was? Dr. Price considered the question carefully. I think the house carries the imprint of Emma Walsh's death. 12 years of that trauma, that energy, saturating the structure. When Patricia moved in and began experiencing similar abuse, I believe the house responded. Not consciously. Houses aren't alive, but traumatic events can create patterns in a location, resonances, and Patricia's trauma resonated with Emma's. So the screaming I heard, was it Patricia or Emma or both? I think it was Patricia's screaming, amplified and broadcast by the resonance with Emma's death. The house was trying to help Patricia, the way no one had been able to help Emma. It was making her invisible, suffering visible, audible, undeniable. Dr. Price smiled tiredly. In a strange way, Emma Walsh saved Patricia's life from beyond the grave. Do you think the phenomena will stop now? Sarah asked. Now that Patricia's free? I don't know. The house may be quiet now that the active trauma has ended, or the imprint may remain, a permanent echo of what happened there. Either way, I don't think anyone will be living in that house for a long time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Dr. Price stood to leave. You did good work, Sarah. You trusted your instincts when everyone else told you to stop. That takes courage. After Dr. Price left, Sarah went to bed but couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying everything that had happened, the screaming that had started all of this, the police finding nothing, her investigation and growing certainty that something terrible was happening next door, the discovery of the hidden room, and finally, Patricia's rescue. Sarah thought about Robert Henderson, how normal he'd seemed, how he'd convinced police repeatedly that Sarah was the problem, that she was harassing his family. He'd been so convincing, so manipulative. If not for the supernatural elements, the screaming that Sarah could hear but others couldn't, Robert might have gotten away with it indefinitely. Around noon, Sarah woke to her phone ringing. Rebecca Walsh. I wanted to give you an update. Patricia provided a detailed statement this morning. She's been held in that hidden room for the past 2 years. Before that, Robert controlled her through psychological abuse and isolation. But 2 years ago, when she tried to leave, he built that room and started locking her in there whenever she disobeyed or when anyone came to the house. Sarah felt sick. 2 years? But I saw her. I saw her in the living room just a few days ago. That was real. Robert would let her out sometimes when he thought it was safe, when he wanted to maintain appearances. But most of the time she was locked in that room. The daughter knew but was too terrified to speak up. Robert had threatened both of them, said he'd kill them if they told anyone. What about the daughter? Is she okay? She's with Patricia's sister now. She'll need counseling, but she's safe, and her testimony will help convict Robert. Between your evidence, Patricia's statement, and the daughter's testimony, Robert Henderson will spend a long time in prison. After hanging up, Sarah went to her window and looked at the Henderson house. It stood dark and empty now. Crime scene tape stretched across the front door. She wondered what would happen to it. Would anyone ever want to live there again, knowing what had occurred inside? That night, Sarah waited nervously for 2:47 a.m. She wasn't sure what she'd hear. Would the screaming continue and echo replaying forever? Or would the house finally be quiet? 2:47 a.m. came and went. Silence. No screaming. The house remained dark and still. Whatever had been amplifying Patricia's suffering had stopped. The trauma had ended, and so had its supernatural broadcast. Sarah finally slept peacefully that night, for the first time since moving to this house. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah gave her formal statement to state investigators, spending hours describing everything she'd witnessed. Dr. Price provided her evidence: the thermal imaging, the audio recordings, the video documentation. Together, their testimony built an overwhelming case against Robert Henderson. The media picked up the story. "Man arrested after wife found hidden in secret room for 2 years," read the headlines. Reporters called Sarah constantly, wanting interviews. She declined them all. This wasn't about her, it was about Patricia and the countless other abuse victims who suffered in silence. Patricia spent a week in the hospital recovering from her ordeal. Physical wounds could heal, but the psychological trauma would take much longer. Sarah wanted to visit but wasn't sure if it would be welcome. She was relieved when Rebecca Walsh called to say Patricia wanted to meet. They arranged to meet at a cafe downtown, neutral territory away from the house where so much trauma had occurred. Patricia arrived with her sister, looking thin and frail, but clean and dressed in fresh clothes. When she saw Sarah, she smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Sarah," Patricia said, embracing her, "I don't even know how to thank you. You saved my life, literally." "I wish I'd figured it out sooner," Sarah said. "I'm so sorry you went through that." They sat down and Patricia told her story. She'd married Robert 15 years ago, attracted to his confidence and success. At first, he'd been charming, attentive, but gradually he'd become controlling. Isolated her from friends and family, made her quit her job, monitored her every move. The abuse started small, Patricia said. Verbal put-downs, little cruelties, but it escalated. 5 years ago, he hit me for the first time. I tried to leave, but he found me and convinced me to come back, said he'd change. He never did, it only got worse. "When did he build the hidden room?" Sarah asked gently. 2 years ago. I'd tried to leave again, actually made it to a women's shelter, but he found me, manipulated me into coming back. That's when he built it. He said it was for my own safety, that I was mentally unstable and needed a quiet place. But really, it was a prison. Every time he got angry, every time someone came to the house, he'd lock me in there, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Patricia's hands shook as she spoke. Her sister put a comforting arm around her. "He made me call you that day, made me tell you to stop bothering us. He was standing right there watching me, making sure I said the right words. I wanted to scream for help, but I was too afraid of what he'd do after you left." "How did he explain your disappearance to people? Didn't anyone ask where you were?" "He told everyone I was visiting relatives or sick or that I'd left him. We'd moved around enough that we had no close friends nearby, no one to check on me. My sister tried once." Patricia looked at the woman beside her, tears in her eyes. "But Robert told her I didn't want to see her, that I was angry at my family. He was so convincing, and I couldn't call out to her, couldn't let her know I was locked in that room just upstairs from where she stood." "I should have tried harder," Patricia's sister said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have known something was wrong." "You couldn't have known," Patricia said. "Robert was too good at lying, too good at manipulating everyone." Sarah thought about what Dr. Price had theorized, that the house had been trying to help Patricia by amplifying her suffering, making it audible to someone who could help. "Can I ask you something? Did you know about Emma Walsh? About what happened in that house before you moved in?" Patricia shook her head. "Not until much later. Robert never told me about the house's history. But I felt it. From the first week we lived there, I felt like something was wrong with that house. Like it was sad or angry or I don't know how to describe it. And then when the abuse started, when Robert built that room, I began having dreams about a woman who died there. She'd come to me in these dreams and tell me to scream, to make noise, to make someone hear me. Sarah felt chills. Emma Walsh was trying to help you. I think so. I didn't understand it at the time. But every night at 2:47 a.m., that's when Robert would hurt me. It became a routine for him. He'd wait until that specific time like he was ritualistic about it, and I would scream. I couldn't help it. The pain, the terror, I had to scream. And somehow you heard me, when no one else could. The house made sure I heard you, Sarah said. Dr. Price thinks the trauma Emma experienced in that house created a kind of echo. When your trauma matched hers, the house amplified it, made your suffering impossible to ignore. Then Emma saved us both, Patricia said quietly. She couldn't save herself, but she found a way to save me. They talked for another hour. Patricia explained that she'd be moving far away, starting over with her sister's help. She'd be testifying at Robert's trial, but after that, she never wanted to see that house or this neighborhood again. Sarah understood completely. As they were leaving, Patricia hugged Sarah tightly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Thank you for not giving up on me even when everyone said you were wrong. After they left, Sarah sat in her car for a long time, thinking. She'd moved to this neighborhood looking for a fresh start, never imagining she'd end up investigating a supernatural mystery that led to saving someone's life. Life was strange that way. When Sarah got home, she found Dr. Price waiting for her. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I'm okay, Sarah said. Just processing everything. How are you? Busy. I've been contacted by several other people who've experienced similar phenomena, screaming or cries for help that no one else can hear, coming from houses with dark histories. I think what happened here might be more common than we realized. You mean there might be other people trapped, other houses amplifying their suffering? Possibly. I'm starting a research initiative to investigate these cases, and I was hoping you might help. You have good instincts, and you proved you're willing to dig deeper when things don't make sense. Sarah considered this. She'd never imagined becoming some kind of paranormal investigator, but after everything that had happened, after seeing how the combination of supernatural phenomena and persistent investigation had saved Patricia's life, she felt drawn to the idea. Let me think about it, Sarah said. That night, Sarah stood at her bedroom window, looking at the Henderson house. Crime scene tape still blocked the entrance. The house looked abandoned, haunted by the suffering it had witnessed. She wondered if it would ever be lived in again, or if it would stand empty, a monument to domestic horror. At 2:47 a.m., Sarah lay awake, half expecting to hear the screaming out of habit, but there was only silence. The nightly broadcast of Patricia's suffering had ended. The house was finally quiet. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere else, in another house with a dark history, someone else was screaming. Someone else was trapped and suffering, their cries being amplified by walls that remembered trauma. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah could help them too. She picked up her phone and texted Dr. Price, "I'm in. Where do we start?" 3 months later, Sarah sat in a courtroom, waiting to testify. Robert Henderson's trial had finally begun, and the prosecution had built a case that seemed overwhelming. Physical evidence of the hidden room, Patricia's testimony, the daughter's testimony, medical evidence of years of abuse, Sarah's recordings and Dr. Price's documentation. Everything pointed to Robert's guilt. Yet Robert sat at the defense table looking calm and confident. He'd hired an expensive legal team who were arguing that Patricia had mental health issues, that the hidden room had been built for her safety, that everything had been consensual or justified. They were trying to paint Sarah as an obsessed neighbor who'd misinterpreted what she'd seen, and Dr. Price as a fringe scientist whose paranormal evidence was unreliable. When Sarah was called to testify, she took the stand nervously. The prosecutor, working with Rebecca Walsh, walked her through her testimony. The screaming she'd heard, the police finding nothing, her investigation and documentation, everything she'd witnessed. Then came the cross-examination. Robert's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Chen, approached with a confident smile. "Ms. Mitchell, you claim you heard screaming every night at 2:47 a.m., is that correct?" "Yes, but police responded multiple times and heard nothing. Isn't that right?" "Yes, but And when they searched the house, they found no evidence of anyone being harmed or held against their will, correct? That's because Patricia was hidden in the secret room. A room you discovered through what you call thermal imaging and paranormal investigation. Ms. Mitchell, do you believe in ghosts? Sarah hesitated. I believe houses can retain energy from traumatic events. That's a yes or no question. Do you believe in ghosts? I believe in phenomena we don't fully understand, Ms. Chen smiled. Let me rephrase. You believe you heard screaming that no one else could hear, including police officers. You believe this screaming was amplified by the ghost of a woman who died in that house years ago. You believe my client built a hidden room specifically to imprison his wife, even though he has no construction background, and the room would have required significant renovation that neighbors would have noticed. And you believe all of this based on equipment and theories provided by a paranormal investigator. Does that sum up your testimony? The way Ms. Chen phrased it made Sarah's entire investigation sound ridiculous. I heard a woman screaming for help. I investigated. I found evidence of abuse, and Patricia Henderson was rescued from that hidden room. Those are facts. What's a fact is that you developed an obsession with my client's family, that you repeatedly trespassed, looked through their windows, made false police reports, and harassed them to the point where my client had to file a restraining order. What's a fact is that Patricia Henderson suffers from documented mental health issues and sometimes requires a safe, quiet space. What's a fact is that you inserted yourself into a private medical situation and turned it into a criminal case. That's not true. No further questions. Sarah left the stand feeling shaken. Ms. Chen had twisted everything, made Sarah sound like an obsessed, irrational person, rather than someone who'd saved a life. She worried that Robert might actually be acquitted, but then Patricia took the stand, and Patricia's testimony was devastating. She described 15 years of escalating abuse. The isolation, the control, the violence. She showed the scars on her arms, her back, places Robert had hurt her repeatedly. She described being locked in the hidden room for days at a time, with minimal food and water, no bathroom, no light. She described Robert timing his assaults to 2:47 a.m. specifically because that's when Emma Walsh had died, because he'd researched the house's history and found it amusing to torture his wife at the same time another woman had died. He said Emma's ghost would keep me company. Patricia testified, tears streaming down her face. He said if I died in that room, I'd become a ghost too, and no one would ever know what happened to me. Ms. Chen tried to cross-examine, tried to suggest Patricia was lying or exaggerating, but Patricia's testimony was too detailed, too consistent, too backed up by physical evidence. The jury watched in horror as Patricia described her captivity. The daughter testified next. She described living in fear, knowing her mother was being hurt but too terrified to seek help. She described Robert's threats, his violence, the way he controlled every aspect of their lives. She hadn't been allowed to have friends, to use social media, to tell anyone what was happening at home. I heard my mom screaming every night, she said, her voice small, at 2:47 a.m., like clockwork, and I'd lie in my bed and cry because I couldn't help her. I couldn't stop him. Dr. Price testified about the evidence she'd collected. While Ms. Chen tried to dismiss the paranormal elements, Dr. Price kept the focus on the concrete evidence, the thermal imaging that showed Patricia's heat signature in the hidden room, the audio recordings of her cries for help, the video of Robert assaulting her. The supernatural elements aren't on trial here, Dr. Price said calmly when Ms. Chen challenged her credentials. What's on trial is whether Robert Henderson imprisoned and abused his wife. My evidence proves he did, regardless of how that evidence was obtained. Rebecca Walsh's closing argument was powerful. She reviewed all the evidence, all the testimony. She spoke about the pattern of abuse, the way Robert had manipulated everyone, his family, the police, his neighbors, into believing he was normal while hiding unspeakable cruelty. Robert Henderson is a monster who hid in plain sight, Rebecca said. He built a prison inside his house and kept his wife there for 2 years. He beat her, starved her, tormented her, and he nearly got away with it because he's skilled at presenting a normal facade. But thanks to Sarah Mitchell's persistence, thanks to Dr. Eleanor Price's expertise, and thanks to Patricia Henderson's courage in testifying, We can finally hold this man accountable. Ms. Chen's closing argument tried to create reasonable doubt. She argued that Patricia was mentally ill, that the hidden room was for her safety, that Sarah was an unreliable witness whose paranormal beliefs colored her perception. But Sarah could see the jury wasn't buying it. They'd seen the evidence. They'd heard Patricia's testimony. They knew the truth. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Robert Henderson's face finally showed emotion, rage and disbelief. He started to stand, shouting that it was all lies, but bailiffs quickly restrained him. As he was led away, he looked directly at Sarah with pure hatred in his eyes. Sarah met his gaze calmly. She'd won. Patricia was free. And Robert would never hurt anyone again. 6 months after Robert Henderson's conviction, Sarah stood outside 1847 Maple Street with Dr. Price and a film crew. They were documenting the house's history for a case study on how domestic violence can create paranormal phenomena. The house had been sitting empty since Patricia's rescue, and the bank that owned it had agreed to let them investigate before deciding what to do with the property. "Ready?" Dr. Price asked. Sarah nodded. She hadn't been inside since that night when police had discovered Patricia. Now in daylight, with the purpose of understanding rather than rescuing, she felt different approaching it. Calmer, more analytical. They entered through the front door. The house was musty from months of being closed up, but otherwise looked normal. Furniture still in place, pictures on the walls, the facade of domestic life that Robert had maintained so carefully. They went upstairs to the master bedroom. The hidden door stood open. Police had broken the mechanism when they'd rescued Patricia. Sarah stood at the entrance to the small room where Patricia had been imprisoned. It was barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed with a thin mattress. A bucket in the corner that had served as a toilet. No windows. No light except what came through the door. "She survived 2 years in here," Sarah said quietly. "I can't imagine the strength that took." Dr. Price was setting up her equipment. "I want to see if any residual energy remains. If the phenomena will manifest even though Patricia is no longer suffering here." They waited through the afternoon and into evening. Dr. Price's instruments were monitoring electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, any anomalies that might indicate paranormal activity. But everything remained normal. The house was quiet. At 2:47 a.m. they were both watching the hidden room carefully. Sarah half expected to hear the screaming again, that terrible sound that had started everything. But there was only silence. The house remained still. "Nothing," Dr. Price said, checking her instruments. "No phenomena at all. The trauma cycle has ended. Whatever amplification was occurring when Patricia was suffering here, it stopped completely. So the house is clean now. In a manner of speaking, the history remains, but the active phenomena has ended. This house won't broadcast suffering anymore because there's no suffering to broadcast." They spent the next few hours documenting everything for their case study. Dr. Price interviewed Sarah on camera about her experiences. Sarah talked about hearing the screaming, the investigation, the frustration of not being believed, and finally the rescue. "What would you say to someone who thinks they might be experiencing something similar?" the interviewer asked. "Someone who hears things no one else hears, who suspects a neighbor is in danger?" "Trust your instincts," Sarah said. "Don't let people convince you that you're wrong or imagining things. If you hear someone screaming for help, investigate. Document everything. Find experts who will take you seriously, and don't give up. Somewhere someone might be depending on you to hear them when no one else can." After the filming ended, Sarah stood outside the house one last time. She thought about Emma Walsh, who died here alone despite screaming for help. She thought about Patricia, who'd come so close to the same fate. And she thought about the strange way trauma could echo through time, how suffering in the past could help save someone in the present. Dr. Price joined her. "The bank is planning to demolish this house. They think it's too tainted by what happened to Eversell. Honestly, I think that's the right decision." "What about Emma Walsh?" Sarah asked. "She died here too. Should there be some kind of memorial?" "I spoke to Patricia about that. She wants to fund a memorial. Not at this site, but at the women's shelter where she's now volunteering. A plaque honoring Emma Walsh and all victims of domestic violence. Something positive coming from tragedy. Sarah liked that idea. Let this cursed house be demolished and forgotten. Let Emma's memory live on somewhere that actually helped people. Over the next few weeks, Sarah watched as the house was torn down. Piece by piece, the structure that had witnessed so much suffering was dismantled. First the roof, then the walls, then the foundation. Workers discovered the hidden room and marveled at how well constructed it was, how difficult it would have been to find without knowing it was there. Guy who built this knew what he was doing, one worker told Sarah. Hidden door, soundproofing, ventilation system. This was designed to keep someone prisoner long-term. Real sick stuff. When the demolition was complete, only an empty lot remained. The bank planned to sell it as vacant land. Sarah hoped whoever eventually bought it would build something good there. A happy home where children played and families laughed. Something to erase the darkness that had soaked into that ground. Sarah had been working with Dr. Price on other cases. They'd traveled to 3 different cities, investigating reports of supernatural phenomena connected to domestic violence. In each case, they'd found similar patterns: houses with histories of abuse, current victims whose suffering was somehow being amplified or broadcast, and neighbors who could hear things no one else could. They'd helped rescue 2 more victims. In one case, a man whose wife had locked him in their basement for months, with neighbors reporting hearing male screaming that police couldn't confirm. In another, an elderly woman whose adult son was keeping her prisoner, with a neighbor hearing cries for help through walls that supposedly held no one. Sarah was developing a reputation. People contacted her when they heard things that didn't make sense, when they suspected abuse but couldn't prove it. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to push past skepticism and embarrassment, to investigate thoroughly. And most importantly, she'd learned that she wasn't crazy. She was perceptive in ways others weren't. "You have a gift," Dr. Price told her during one of their investigations. "Some people are more sensitive to these phenomena than others. You can hear suffering that others can't. That makes you valuable, irreplaceable even." 1 year after Patricia's rescue, Sarah received an invitation. Patricia was getting married to a kind man she'd met through the women's shelter where she volunteered. The wedding would be small, just close friends and family, and Patricia wanted Sarah there. Sarah attended, bringing Dr. Price as her +1. Patricia looked transformed, healthy, happy, glowing with genuine joy. When she saw Sarah, she embraced her tightly. "I wouldn't be here without you," Patricia said. "I'd still be in that room or worse. You gave me my life back." "You were strong enough to survive," Sarah said. "I just helped you get free." "We helped each other," Patricia corrected. "I screamed and you listened. That's all it took. Someone finally listened." The wedding was beautiful. Sarah watched Patricia exchange vows with her new husband, watched her smile without fear, watched her embrace a future she thought she'd never have. It was a powerful reminder of why Sarah did this work, why she investigated the seemingly impossible, why she trusted her instincts even when everyone said she was wrong. After the wedding, Sarah and Dr. Price drove back to Sarah's house. Sarah had decided to stay in her home despite everything that had happened. The Henderson house was gone now, replaced by an empty lot, and the neighborhood felt lighter without it. Sarah had made peace with living here, had even become friends with her other neighbors. "What's next for us?" Sarah asked as Dr. Price prepared to leave. "I have 3 new cases I'm investigating, all similar patterns, all in different states. I could use your help." "I'm in," Sarah said without hesitation. "When do we leave?" They spent the next few hours planning their investigations. But as evening fell, and Dr. Price left, Sarah found herself alone in her house, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. She'd moved here looking for a quiet life, a fresh start. Instead, she'd discovered a calling. That night, Sarah lay in bed, unable to sleep. Around 2 a.m., she heard something that made her sit up alert. Not screaming, something else. A sound from somewhere else in the neighborhood. A rhythmic thumping. Bang, bang, bang. Regular, insistent, like someone hitting a wall. Sarah got up and went to her window. She listened carefully, trying to determine where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from 2 houses down. The Morrison house. She'd never met the Morrisons. They kept to themselves like the Hendersons had. Bang, bang, bang. The sound continued, deliberate, desperate, a pattern that felt like communication, like someone trying to send a message. Sarah grabbed her phone and texted Dr. Price. "I'm hearing something. 2 houses down. Morse code, maybe? Someone's trapped and trying to signal." Dr. Price responded immediately. "I'm coming back. Don't investigate alone. We've learned that lesson." While waiting for Dr. Price, Sarah watched the Morrison house. It was dark except for one light in an upstairs window. As she watched, the light flickered. Off, on, off, on. Not like an electrical problem, like someone was controlling it deliberately, flashing a signal. Sarah grabbed her laptop and looked up Morse code. She started translating the pattern of bangs and light flashes, HELPMEPLEASE. Someone in the Morrison house was trapped and calling for help, just like Patricia had been, and Sarah had heard them, just like she'd heard Patricia. Dr. Price arrived 20 minutes later with her equipment. "Tell me what you heard." Sarah played the recording she'd made on her phone. The banging pattern was clear. Together they translated it fully. "Help me, please. Locked in basement. Husband coming back soon. Help." "Another one," Dr. Price said grimly. "Another victim. Another house broadcasting suffering." "We need to act fast," Sarah said. "If her husband is coming back soon." "I'm calling Rebecca Walsh," Dr. Price said, already dialing. "We're not waiting for local police this time. We've learned that lesson too." Within an hour, the same state intervention team that had rescued Patricia arrived at the Morrison house. This time, Sarah's recording of the Morse code was enough for an emergency entry order. Officers broke down the door and searched the house. They found Mrs. Morrison locked in a reinforced basement room, bound and gagged. Her husband, who'd been at work when police arrived, was arrested as he returned home. Mrs. Morrison was rescued, just like Patricia had been. As EMTs brought Mrs. Morrison out, she saw Sarah standing in the yard. "You heard me," Mrs. Morrison whispered. "The banging." "You heard me." "I heard you," Sarah confirmed. "You're safe now." After everything calmed down and statements were taken, Sarah stood outside her house with Dr. Price. It was nearly dawn. "This is going to keep happening," Dr. Price said. "There are more houses like these, more victims trying to signal for help, more neighbors who might hear something if they just pay attention." "Then we keep investigating," Sarah said. "We keep listening. We keep rescuing people." "You understand this is your life now?" Dr. Price asked. "This is what you do." Sarah thought about Patricia at her wedding, glowing with happiness and freedom. She thought about Mrs. Morrison being carried out of that basement, alive because Sarah had heard her. She thought about all the future victims who might be saved if someone was paying attention. "I understand," Sarah said, "and I'm ready." 2 years after Patricia Henderson's rescue, Sarah had become something she never imagined, a specialist in cases involving domestic abuse and paranormal phenomena. She and Dr. Price had investigated 47 cases across 12 states. They'd rescued 23 victims, most of them women, but also men and elderly people held captive by abusive family members. Sarah had developed a protocol. When someone contacted her about hearing screams or cries for help that no one else could hear, she'd investigate the house's history first. Almost always there was a pattern: previous incidents of violence, past residents who'd suffered, some kind of traumatic imprint on the location. The current suffering was somehow being amplified by past suffering, creating phenomena that sensitive people could perceive. She'd learned to trust her instincts completely. If she heard something, it was real. If a house felt wrong, it was wrong. And if she felt compelled to investigate, lives might depend on it. But this new case was different. Sarah stood outside a house in suburban Milwaukee, staring at it with a growing sense of unease. Everything about this case was wrong, and she couldn't figure out why. The house belonged to the Williamson family. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had contacted Sarah after hearing screaming every night for 2 months. Sarah had arrived to investigate 3 days ago, and she'd confirmed the screaming. Loud, terrified, definitely coming from the Williamson house at 3:17 a.m. every night. But when she'd researched the house's history, she'd found nothing. No previous incidents of violence, no traumatic events. The house had been built only 5 years ago on land that had previously been a cornfield. There was no history to amplify anything, and when Sarah had met the Williamson family, they'd seemed normal. Too normal. John and Mary Williamson, both in their 40s, along with their 3 children, ages 16, 14 and 10. They were friendly when Sarah introduced herself as a researcher studying acoustic phenomena in residential areas. They'd invited her in, shown her around. The house was clean, comfortable, filled with family photos and children's artwork. No red flags. Yet the screaming continued every night, and Sarah's instincts screamed that something was very wrong here. Dr. Price had arrived that afternoon with her full array of equipment. They'd set up surveillance, thermal imaging, audio recording, everything they'd used in previous cases. Now they waited for 3:17 a.m. "What's bothering you?" Dr. Price asked, noticing Sarah's tension. "Everything about this feels off," Sarah said. "The house has no history. The family seems genuinely happy, but someone is screaming in agony every night. Where's it coming from?" "Maybe this is a different kind of phenomenon," Dr. Price suggested. "Not everything has to fit the pattern we've established." At 3:15 a.m., both women were alert and watching. Sarah had her audio recorder ready. Dr. Price monitored the thermal cameras and EMF readers. The Williamson house was dark and quiet. At 3:17 a.m., the screaming started. But something was different this time. Sarah was listening through high-quality headphones connected to her enhanced recording equipment, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The screaming was layered. Multiple voices, all screaming at once, overlapping and blending together. At least a dozen different voices, maybe more. Men, women, children, all screaming in terror. "Dr. Price," Sarah said urgently. "Listen to this." She handed over the headphones. Dr. Price listened, her expression growing more horrified by the second. "That's not one person. That's many people, all screaming together." They looked at the thermal imaging. The entire Williamson house was showing heat signatures, but not in the normal pattern of sleeping people in beds. The signatures were all clustered in one location, in what appeared to be the basement, and they were moving erratically, frantically, like people trying to escape from something. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "There are people in that basement, multiple people, held against their will." Dr. Price was already calling Rebecca Walsh. Sarah, meanwhile, was counting the heat signatures. 15, 20, 25 more. At least 30 people were in that basement, all of them showing signs of extreme distress on the thermal camera. "Rebecca, we have an emergency situation," Dr. Price said urgently. "Multiple captives. We need immediate intervention. Full tactical response." While they waited for help to arrive, Sarah and Dr. Price watched the thermal imaging with growing horror. The heat signatures were packed tightly together, suggesting a confined space. Some signatures were small, children. The thought made Sarah feel sick. "How did we not see this coming?" Sarah asked. "How did the Williamsons seem so normal?" "Because they're not doing this for personal reasons," Dr. Price said grimly. "This isn't domestic abuse. This is something else. Organized. Deliberate. We're looking at a human trafficking operation." 30 minutes later, the street was filled with vehicles. State Police tactical units, FBI agents, Rebecca Walsh and her team. This was beyond a simple domestic violence intervention. This was a major criminal operation. The raid happened fast. Tactical teams breached the house simultaneously from multiple entry points. Sarah and Dr. Price watched from a command vehicle set up down the street, monitoring everything through video feeds. Officers found the Williamson family in their bedrooms, immediately detained them. Mary Williamson was screaming that it was all a misunderstanding. John Williamson remained silent, his expression cold and calculated. The children looked terrified but unharmed. In the basement, officers found what Sarah's thermal imaging had shown, a hidden room behind a false wall, and inside that room were 31 people, 23 women and girls, 8 men and boys ranging in age from 8 years old to mid-40s. They'd been held in deplorable conditions, mattresses on the floor, minimal food and water, 1 bucket for sanitation. Some had been there for months. The oldest captive had been held for 2 years. All of them had been trafficked, kidnapped or lured with false promises, then imprisoned and sold. The Williamson family wasn't actually a family. They were traffickers using a normal suburban facade to hide their operation. Even the children were revealed to be young adults playing roles to maintain the disguise. As victims were brought out and loaded into ambulances, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scale of what they'd uncovered. 31 people. 31 lives saved because Sarah had heard their collective screaming, because she'd trusted her instincts despite this case not fitting her established patterns. Rebecca Walsh approached Sarah and Dr. Price. "You two just broke open one of the largest trafficking operations we've seen in the Midwest. The Williamsons, if that's even their real name, are part of a network. We'll be following this investigation for months, maybe years, dozens of arrests, potentially hundreds of victims rescued." "How were they doing it?" Dr. Price asked. "The screaming, how were we hearing it when they were locked in a soundproofed room?" "We're not sure yet," Rebecca admitted. "Preliminary theory is that 31 people screaming in terror together create some kind of acoustic phenomenon that penetrates normal soundproofing. The sheer volume of combined voices, the overlapping frequencies, it bypasses conventional barriers, like how certain frequencies can shatter glass. But Sarah suspected there was more to it. She'd felt something when she'd listened to those layered screams, not just sound, but desperation. Collective suffering so intense, it broke through physical barriers through sheer force of need, the universe itself making sure their cries would be heard. One of the rescued victims approached Sarah as she was being loaded into an ambulance. A young woman, maybe 20, with hollow eyes and matted hair. "You heard us," she said. "All those nights. You heard us screaming." "I heard you," Sarah confirmed. "I'm so sorry it took so long to find you." "You found us," the woman said. "That's what matters. You didn't stop listening. You didn't give up." Over the next few days, the true scope of the Williamson operation became clear. They'd been trafficking people for 7 years, operating under various identities in different suburbs. The house in Milwaukee was just one location. They had 3 other sites in different states, all hidden in plain sight in normal-looking suburban homes. Thanks to Sarah's intervention, the FBI was able to raid all locations simultaneously, rescuing a total of 87 victims. The media called it the suburban horror case. Sarah and Dr. Price were hailed as heroes. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt haunted by how long these people had been suffering, how many nights they'd screamed for help before anyone heard them. "You can't think that way," Dr. Price told her. "You can't dwell on the time before you found them. Focus on the fact that you did find them, that they're free now because you listened." Sarah knew Dr. Price was right, but she also knew there were probably more victims out there, in other suburban houses, other hidden rooms, all of them screaming for help that no one could hear. The Williamsons' network had been large, but it wasn't the only trafficking operation in the country. How many others were out there? A month after the raid, Sarah received a letter from one of the rescued victims. The young woman who'd thanked her at the ambulance. Her name was Jennifer Reyes, and she'd been held captive for 8 months. "Dear Sarah," the letter read, "I wanted to write and tell you what hearing you meant to us. We'd screamed every night, hoping someone would hear. The Williamsons would laugh at us, tell us no one would ever hear, that the room was soundproof. But we kept screaming anyway. We had to. It was the only thing we could control, the only way we could fight back. And then one night we heard the police sirens, heard them coming for us. We knew someone had finally heard. Someone had finally come. You gave us hope when we had none. You proved that our voices mattered, that our suffering wouldn't be invisible forever. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for saving our lives." Sarah kept that letter. She read it whenever she felt overwhelmed by the work, whenever she questioned whether she was making a difference, because she was making a difference. One case at a time, one victim at a time, one scream at a time, Dr. Price's research had expanded. She'd published papers on the acoustic properties of collective suffering, on how extreme distress could create phenomena that bypassed normal physical barriers. Other researchers were taking her work seriously now, investigating similar cases across the country. A network was forming. People like Sarah who could hear things others couldn't, people like Dr. Price who could document and explain the phenomena, and law enforcement like Rebecca Walsh, who could act on the evidence. Together they were creating a system to rescue victims whose suffering had been invisible for too long. 2 years, 47 cases, 23 rescues, now 31 with the Williamson case. Hundreds of lives saved when you counted all the victims from the trafficking network. And Sarah knew there would be more. Because wherever there was suffering, wherever people were trapped and crying for help, she would hear them. That's what she did now. She listened, and she acted. And she refused to give up on people who needed help, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Sarah Mitchell had found her calling in the most unexpected way. A scream in the night had changed everything, had transformed her from someone running from her past into someone running toward people who needed her. And she wouldn't have it any other way. 5 years after the first scream woke Sarah in the middle of the night, she stood on a stage accepting an award from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Her work with Dr. Price had rescued over 100 victims and helped develop new protocols for investigating cases where traditional methods failed. Patricia Henderson sat in the front row, smiling proudly. Mrs. Morrison was there too, along with Jennifer Reyes and a dozen other survivors Sarah had helped rescue. Seeing them thriving, living free lives, made every sleepless night, every difficult investigation, every moment of doubt worthwhile. "When I first heard screaming from next door," Sarah said in her acceptance speech, "I didn't know what to do. The police found nothing. Everyone told me I was wrong, imagining things, obsessed, but I knew what I heard, and I refused to stop listening." That's what I want to say to anyone who's listening tonight. If you hear something, if you sense something is wrong, trust your instincts. Investigate, document, persist. Someone's life might depend on you hearing them when no one else can. And to those who are suffering in silence, who are trapped and afraid, keep screaming, keep fighting, keep making noise however you can. Someone is listening. Someone will hear you. Help is coming. Never stop believing that. The audience stood in applause. Sarah looked out at all those faces. Survivors, advocates, law enforcement, researchers, all of them united in the belief that every voice mattered, that every cry for help deserved to be heard. After the ceremony, Sarah returned to her hotel room and checked her messages. There was one from an unknown number. "Please help. I hear my neighbor crying through the walls every night. Police say nothing is wrong. But I know something is. Can you investigate?" Sarah smiled and typed her response. "Send me the address. I'm on my way." Because that's what she did now. She listened, she investigated, she rescued, and she would never stop. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was screaming, and Sarah would hear them. "That's where he's keeping her," Sarah said. "When police come, he forces her in there. She can't call out, can't be found, and he acts like everything's normal.